The most obvious thing about all of EFNOTE's kit so far is that they're going in hard on the idea of acoustic replication, and the EFNOTE Pro kit that they revealed at NAMM 2023 is possibly the pinnacle of that ideology. My understanding of EFNOTE's design philosophy is that they want to create simple-to-use electronic drum kits that sound and play like an acoustic drum kit. They don't want users to get bogged down in technical specs like sample count, spend hours modeling a kit to sound like a digitized approximation of a drum, or sit there frustrated by complex menu systems that relate to settings that they just don't understand. EFNOTE wants you to select a kit, play it and have fun, whether that's at home with their 3, 5 or 7 kits, or on stage with this new Pro kit that's aimed squarely at artists playing live. However, chasing that exact experience of an acoustic kit with a volume knob might have had an unintended consequence that's highlighted by this new Pro kit. Now, just to give credit where it's due, there are other videos from people who made it to NAMM this year and have tried the kit themselves. However, I've been guzzling up all of the information that I can about it, so I'm going to break down what I think are the most interesting parts of the features and specs, and weigh in with my thoughts and concerns about the approach that this kit doubles down on. So right away, this is a little bit of a dividing line. There are many people who find the idea of acoustic-sized electronic drums to be completely baffling. You lose all of the convenience of portability, and you gain a lot of bulk for little other than vanity in their eyes. Then there's a further subset of those people that think acoustic sounds on electronic drums are also completely missing the point. And these are totally legitimate angles to come from. If you're into electronic drums for their unique attributes, the EFNOTE Pro or any other EFNOTE kit really most likely isn't for you. On the flip side, if you do want your electronic drums to essentially mirror your acoustic drums but with less volume, the EFNOTE Pro kits could be up your alley. The kit setup on show at NAMM was a 7-piece shell pack with a 20-inch kick, 14-inch snare and 8-inch through 15-inch toms, all with acoustic shell depths, along with a 20-inch ride, 14-inch hat and an array of other cymbal pads. If you go over to their website, you can see all of the configurations they've made for this Pro line. The previous EFNOTE 5 and 7 pads become the 500 and 700 series when you pair them with the Pro module, and there are an almost overwhelming number of setups, but each one appears to be based around a core pad set which then expands outwards. So the 500 kits all have a 16-inch kick, 12-inch snare and 18-inch ride, then the rest of the toms that get matched with them are typically their smaller pads, from 8-inch rack toms to 12 and 13-inch floor toms. The 700 kits are based around the 20-inch kick, 14-inch snare and 20-inch ride, and then covers the full range of toms from 8-inch to the 15-inch floor tom. This is a very acoustic-like approach to their configurations. Rather than a bunch of identical pads, you've got various pad types that are aiming to replicate specific acoustic drums in a typical setup. I haven't seen any other companies offer this level of customization, and I think it's a pretty good move when they're aiming at professional and touring drummers. The Pro module itself is the main thing that I'm personally interested in, and it's taking a pretty interesting approach. Rather than one full unit, it's split into a controller module and a stage box. So it appears that the controller or sound module is where the sounds are stored and where the processing happens, and it's also the interface that you'll use to interact with the settings, routing, and other functionality. The stage box, on the other hand, is like the back panel of a more conventional drum module but on overdrive. There are trigger inputs for 15 instruments in total, the snare has an extra input for their cross-stick zone pad, and the hi-hat has a proprietary connection for their optical sensor. So you get a single zone kick drum, a snare with 3 dedicated zones, head, rim and cross-stick, 5 dual zone toms, head and rim, the hi-hat, ride and 4 of the cymbals are triple zone, edge, bow and bell, and the remaining 2 cymbals are dual zone with edge and bow. The hi-hat bell zone is a new addition. This wasn't a feature on previous EFNOTE modules, and the only other currently available kits with a hi-hat bell that I'm aware of are Gaver's G9, G5 and G3 kits, so it's pretty cool to see it here. The stage box really starts to shine with its other connections though. It has 12 XLR outputs which you won't find on any other drum module. A few modules have XLR outputs for a master left and right feed, but the direct outputs are usually jack connections which would need converting routing to XLR with DI boxes or a DI rack if you were sending them to the front of house. There's also a ground lift switch for these outputs too, which is very handy. This stage box does away with the need for extra hardware, and I think that's a great approach when you're targeting live players. There are two headphone outputs, a 1/4 inch and an 1/8 inch output, powered by two headphone amps. There are also left and right unbalanced line outputs, a left and right line input for adding other sound sources into the mix, and left and right XLR monitor inputs intended for plugging in a monitor return from the desk, which also have a dedicated ground lift switch. At the bottom, there's the connection cable for the controller module, which is secured with pins. That's definitely a good idea for stage use, along with a USB connection, and there's a DIN MIDI out socket on the side of the box too. The USB connection will let you record 12 channels of audio directly to a DAW for multi-track recording, and it also sends MIDI over this connection too, so you can record that alongside the audio. So this is a great selection of inputs and outputs which will cover the majority of needs in a live or studio environment, and I think this separated controller and connection approach is a good one for a few reasons. To begin with, having all of your cables on the floor instead of dangling down the side of the kit puts less stress on the connections, and it also keeps things looking a lot cleaner. I also assume that future iterations of the Pro line will continue to use the same stage box, but just swap out the sound module, since you don't really need to upgrade a box full of jack connections and XLRs. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with that in the future. That said, obviously it's not even out yet, so considering upgrades isn't something to get too hung up on at the moment. Things become a bit more of a mixed bag with the sound module in my opinion. As with all of the EFNOTE kits, everything I've heard so far sounds pretty nice and usable. Apparently all of the sounds in this module are also newly recorded, and they definitely sound like well recorded, nicely tuned acoustic drums with multiple velocity layers. To me, it still sounds like there might be fewer velocity layers or samples overall than a module like the Mimic Pro, but most of the playing sounds pretty natural, and it's only really on some of the buzz roll examples that I go, oh yeah, these are samples. As I found with most electronic kits though, getting the dynamics dialed in properly for your playing can make a huge difference, so it's difficult to judge this from a video without playing it myself. The number of kits on the pre-release module is reportedly quite low, 15 or something, though whether or not that's the final count for the release version isn't certain. Going off some snippets of the individual instrument list that I've seen, the instrument count might be higher than the kit count suggests, but that does remain to be seen. And as a counterpoint, if all of the instruments sound nice and are really playable, that might have more weight for a lot of people than 500 sounds that they'll never use. If you're hoping to load any custom sounds that you do use to this module though, unfortunately that's not possible. There's no sample import option, and there's no way to build your own instruments from samples like you might with a 2-box module, the Alesis Strike or a Pearl Mimic Pro. For some people this could be a deal breaker. However, the EFNOTE website does say that there will be an instrument library added to their site that you can get new sounds from in the future. At the moment though, the scope of that and whether or not they're free or paid for hasn't been announced. According to a NAMM interview with Mike Bedard on Drumming News Network's channel, the newly recorded sounds do have some ambience baked in, so they should sound bigger than on previous modules. However, you don't get any control over the microphones or the room ambience on the module itself, so they'll probably still tend towards a drier sound. On other EFNOTE modules, they use digital reverb to compensate for this. However, on the EFNOTE Pro, reverb has been completely removed. Now, the logic behind this is that the Pro kit is made to be used live on stage, and as a general rule, room ambience or reverb can make a mix really muddy in a live setting, especially in a large room where actual room reflections are happening. Much like with a close-mic'd acoustic kit, you want the clarity of the instrument to cut through the noise, then you might add a little bit of reverb as an effect if necessary. And usually the drummer doesn't add the reverb even if it's wanted, the sound engineer does. However, I still think that completely removing it is a bit of a misstep, especially when it's in all of their other modules. On the flip side, they've added compression to the module, which is a first for EFNOTE, and this is good news in my opinion. Compression is one of those sound shaping tools that can be really obvious or incredibly subtle, and you'll get a lot of different opinions about its use, but ultimately having the option for it is great. The way that it's been implemented on this kit seems to be a bit basic overall, but before I get into that, it would make a little more sense to talk about the audio routing features. So Justin from 65 Drums briefly showed some of the different screens on his recent EFNOTE Pro video, and the the routing screen looks pretty simple and intuitive. You've got the instruments and their sounds, and then you've got 12 assignable audio buses which match up with the 12 XLR outputs on the stage box. 15 instruments going to 12 buses means that some instruments will be combined. Then there's a bus for the metronome and 2 spare buses at the end. The next screen along lets you stereo pair the buses, and the bus mixer lets you control the output levels and the panning. The cymbals being on a stereo bus with the hi-hats on their own is quite similar to a standard overhead microphone setup, so this does make sense, but 2 toms on one channel is a little unconventional. It makes more sense once you take the compression into account. This is only available on the first 6 buses, so if you want compression to apply to every drum, you have to pair at least 2 of them together. You also can't use compression on the cymbals with this routing setup. Probably not a huge deal in the majority of cases, but it can come in handy at times, especially on the hi-hat. All 12 buses also have a 2-band EQ, which is a little limited compared to most other flagship modules that I've used. The majority have 3-band EQs, with the Mimic having a 5-band EQ, and these are for every instrument. The EFNOTE Pro does have a high-pass filter, so there's kind of a limited 3rd band that can cut low frequencies, but it does lag behind the others a touch, especially seeing as the bus limitation means that Tom 1 and Tom 2 also share an EQ. Now you might be thinking, modules like Roland's TD-50X group things together on the same fader or even on the same outputs. However, the key difference there is that you can still process each of these instruments individually, so on the module they don't share an EQ or compression. Each of those things is per instrument before you send them out in a group. Now, will this actually be a big deal in practice? Possibly not. That will depend on your setup and whether the individual sounds actually need that much attention. You could always pick a different routing setup and process the sounds entirely at the front of house if necessary. It also looks like there aren't any master effects on the module. I don't think any of their previous modules had these either, and they're probably a feature that they're happy to omit as part of the It's a Live kit idea. Personally, I think this is another feature that flagship modules should have, but if you follow their train of thought that an engineer is doing the final mix of the sound, then I suppose these kinds of effects will happen either at the mixing board or in a DAW for recording. One new feature that I do like the look of is the global panning option. Having the panning settings applied to every kit is something that I'd like, and I really like the visual representation of it on the screen. So the EFNOTE Pro kit and its various setups are in a really interesting position. The pricing that's currently being shown online puts it around the same level as other flagship drum kits or modules. The actual kit, the pads and hardware and the stage box certainly looks good on stage, and everything appears to be solid, well made and functionally sound. However, the limits to the EQ and compression, the lack of ambience or reverb, the lack of sample import, these are features that matter to a lot of people. Many of these limitations appear to stem from the philosophy that I outlined at the beginning of the video, trying to mirror the functionality of an acoustic kit in electronic form. Do you want an electronic drum kit that only does what an acoustic kit does but with volume control? I'm obviously being a bit over the top for the sake of an example. It can still swap out sounds on the fly, it can send MIDI to other devices, there's no compression built into my acoustic kit. But there are design decisions here that appear to be limiting choice for the user in ways that I don't feel are entirely necessary. I understand that you might not need ambience on a kit that's intended to be used live, but does that mean there's no reason to have ambience on the module at all? If you want to throw your kit up at home and play with headphones with a bit of reverb on your snare, are you expected to have a different module just to do that, or to add an outboard effects unit? I've also heard the reasoning behind the lack of sample import, and it follows a similar through line. Most pro drummers will have a sample pad on stage with them, so you can use the sample pad alongside this kit in the same way, route its audio through the line in and monitor it for yourself, sending the audio out to its own bus for the front of house. This is seemingly the reason that 2 buses were left free in the default routing. I think it's awesome to have the option and flexibility to do that, but is that the only way that I'm allowed to engage with sampled sounds with this kit? I just find it really strange. There's already a capable electronic device powering my kit. It would be nice to not bring the sampler if I only need a few sounds. I also think that justifying all of this as pro features only falls apart a little little bit when you see that they've still included Bluetooth functionality for audio in on the module. I don't think I'd trust a Bluetooth connection on stage, and I doubt that any pros would either, and that's the reason that they've included those audio inputs on the stage box. However, Bluetooth is great for home use, so why is this still here but other useful non-pro features aren't? Now, this is moving into speculation and I could be entirely wrong, but it makes me wonder whether it's entirely down to this ideology or whether there might be hardware reasons for these limitations. I'd love to be wrong about that and for them to add these features in down the line if there's demand for them, but I do think that it's always best to look for equipment that fulfills your needs at the time that you want to purchase it, rather than hope for features to be implemented down the line. And to steer back away from the negative nitpicking, if these are the things that you want from an electronic drum kit, I honestly think it's going to do those things really well. All signs point to a company run by people that know their audience and do their best to deliver what that audience wants. And I think that's pretty great in a weird, fractured market like electronic drums. And if you want to know what I mean by that, check out this video all about the two kinds of electronic drummers. If you want new sounds for your electronic drum kit, check out my store over at the eDrumworkshop.com, and above all, enjoy the rest of your day. Cheers!